The Center for Information Assurance and Cybersecurity presents Unintended Consequences of the Information Age, a colloquium series that explores controversial issues emerging from our point-and-click world. Our infrastructures, online and vulnerable. Sponsored by the UW Institute for National Security Education and Research and the UW Master of Strategic Planning for Critical Infrastructure's online graduate program, with additional support from the Information School, the Pacific Northwest Center for Global Security, and Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. Part 1 of this lecture included a presentation by Joe Weiss, Ph.D., a graduate of the University of Washington's Master in Strategic Planning for Critical Infrastructure program, who discussed how digital control system problems are different from typical IT issues, and how few people understand them well. It also included a presentation by Paul Oman, Ph.D., from the University of Idaho, who spoke about the ease of intruding on network digital control systems based on his research and experiments he has run with his students. He emphasized the need to make these systems more secure. To see Part 1, please contact UWTV at www.uwtv.org.
It gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce Professor Hilda Blanca. Hilda is the Chair of the Department of Urban Design and Planning and Director of the Masters of Strategic Planning for Critical Infrastructure. Please join me in welcoming Hilda.
Thank you, Dean Bruce. I am very pleased that our colleges and centers are collaborating to bring this important panel to a broad audience. Our panel today is focused on industrial control systems. This is a topic of great relevance to the new Masters in Critical Infrastructures Protection, which I will briefly describe in a minute or so. Critical infrastructure is a term of art coined in the late 1990s by a presidential commission. The definitions of the term, as you find on this slide, emphasize how certain infrastructure systems are vital to national defense, economic prosperity, and quality of life, and how their protection is vital to the country's well-being. It is worthwhile also to point out that over 80% of these systems are in the private sector. These systems have been deemed especially vulnerable today to accidents and attacks due to their interdependence. And as you can see from this figure published by the National Research Council, their interdependence is quite complex. However, what is also clear is that these systems are particularly dependent on electricity and information technology, as you will see right here. The topic of this panel, industrial control systems, is thus vital for the protection of all infrastructure systems, and even though these systems are not separately identified as a critical infrastructure, in effect, they constitute a critical sector which requires attention and study. Let me now take the opportunity to tell you a little about our Masters in Critical Infrastructure. Our program is new and conceived in the aftermath of 9/11. And it was started in January 2004. As a matter of fact, I'm very pleased to tell you that our first distinguished panelist, Joe Weiss, is one of the first graduates of our program. The program is also delivered entirely online, which is convenient for professionals working full-time, and of course is fully accredited. Its mission is to train leaders in infrastructure management to take a strategic approach to the security and management of these systems vital to our nation, blending a strategic planning and systems theory approach to enhance the more traditional emergency management perspective. Students in the program take 2 courses per quarter for 8 quarters, including methods courses and content courses that focus on various infrastructures such as cyber security and physical infrastructures, as well as provides a capstone project. The curriculum includes the teaching of a great variety of skills, including systems theory, emergency management, geospatial analysis, or GIS as we call it, naturalistic decision-making, cost-benefit analysis, and business continuity, among others. In conclusion, our program is a unique blend of an analytic framework to management and protection of infrastructure systems, technical learning about specific infrastructures, and a case study approach which combines both methods and content know-how. For further information on the program, please see our website as found on this final slide. Now, I would like to introduce you to our moderator, Barbara Endicott-Popovsky, who is the director of the Center for Information Assurance and Cybersecurity at the University of Washington, and who is most responsible for bringing this important series of panels to the public. Barbara will also introduce the panelists. Here's Barbara. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker, Mark Hadley, works for an organization that is doing research in this area, the Pacific Northwest National Labs. Mark is a research scientist. He is both project manager and principal investigators for a range of projects in the cybersecurity area and in the critical infrastructure protection arena. His current focus is on protection of critical infrastructure, SCADA systems, process controls, and he is interested in things such as embedded SCADA, and he's here to share his experiences, his research to the extent that he can discuss it with us. So I'd like you to welcome Mark Hadley.
Pacific Northwest National Laboratory is located over in Richland, Washington. We might be better known for boat races in the summer, for being part of Washington's wine country. But since 1965, Battelle Memorial Institute has operated a laboratory for the Department of Energy. And critical infrastructure protection is not just my focus, it's one of the major focus areas for the laboratory. Now, Paul mentioned NERC, and I'm going to start today by a quote from NERC. I could sit here and list vulnerability after vulnerability associated with critical infrastructure and use up all of my time. But this quote, I think, is quite enlightening. The Control System Security Working Group of NERC states on their website, control systems are the brains of the control and monitoring of the bulk electric system and other critical infrastructures. But they were designed for functionality and performance, not security. Joe mentioned that earlier. This part of the quote should be an eye-opener. Most control systems assume an environment of complete and implicit trust. Okay? Most control systems assume an environment of complete and implicit trust. Let me give you an example. Say Paul and Dan were communicating using a walkie-talkie that supported the Morse code function, and you hear the beep, 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 beep as they send messages back and forth. If I had a walkie-talkie that communicated at the same frequency and on the same channel, I can listen in. I can listen into their conversations and learn what they're doing. But I can also inject traffic into that communication, over that communication media. And there is no way to distinguish the malicious traffic or the injected traffic from the legitimate traffic. The Morse code function by itself, the walkie-talkies by themselves, don't support that. Our critical infrastructure is the same. Joe was talking about processes and field devices. When the protocols that are used in that communication do not support authentication. They do not have any means of determining good traffic from malicious traffic, who the sender really is. And if I wanted to, I can inject traffic to very easily open all the breakers in a substation, which then keeps power from flowing. Very easy to do. And you're starting to find that information, as Paul mentioned, on the internet. The operating environment is another area of vulnerabilities I'd like to highlight on. Redundancy. These systems are very, very redundant. And yes, there was a little pun intended with two varies. And they'll have duplicate infrastructure in the control center, two servers communicating out with the field devices, etc. The life cycle, as we were talking about in the green room before we came on, for these control systems might be 30 years or more. And if you look in a dictionary, Webster's dictionary from even 20 years ago, you won't find the term cybersecurity. You won't find SCADA, even though those systems were in place. So the fact that safety or security wasn't a concern shouldn't be too surprising. And as Joe mentioned, we need to figure out a way to protect these legacy systems and design systems for the future. A control system will use both serial and routable protocols. Now, I don't want you to confuse the serial protocol. I don't want you to assume a serial protocol isn't powerful. Okay? Where used appropriately, you can query a field device and get information back. You can control that field device just fine. But I'll give an example of a protocol called DNP, and it's used in the electric industry in this country. It's very, very widespread. Now, this serial protocol allows you to download a new image of firmware. It allows you to reboot that remote device. And it allows you to not just control a single breaker behind that device, but you can control everything with a single command. Okay? Very, very powerful protocol. What's even more important, the controls are done via the protocol and not by the end device. By that I mean I can develop an attack on my little PLC in my office. I can run that against a Schweitzer relay, for example, and it will work just fine. That's analogous to being able to take an attack for a Cisco firewall and have it work on a checkpoint firewall. Well, that doesn't happen today, but in the control system world, because the commands are protocol specific, the end device is irrelevant. So you don't need to know the passwords of the end device. You can wreak havoc anyway by just using the communications protocol. Now, how long has it been since you've used communication at 1200 baud for anything? I remember dialing up to mainframes and doing work at 2400 baud. I never used 1200. Good grief, it was quicker to drive into the office. But 1200 baud is used for our control systems, and even 300 baud. Old bit-based protocols are still in use today. I was at a utility down in Texas, and they still had modem cards that were about 16 inches tall, 16 inches deep, that supported two 1200 baud modems. This equipment is in use today. And how you protect a 1200 baud modem differs from how you protect a gig-E or a 10 gig-E pipe. The same technology cannot port or does not port over easily. And these operating characteristics are points of vulnerability. Now, I was trying to remember from Greek mythology the name of the lady or the beast that had the snakes for her hair. Medusa. Well, that is a control system. You have all of these connections to your control system. You might have hundreds of substations out there, connections for vendors, connections to your corporate network from your control center network, and, oh goodness, business partners, in transmission scheduling in terms of energy in this country. All of these connections are there, and it's just this big, ugly mess. It's this unmanageable mess, like Medusa's snaky hair. And there's a distinct difference. On your IT system, you like to limit the number of connections because it's easier to manage and easier to maintain. Here you have literally hundreds of connections coming into a control center. Another characteristic or a trend that we see happening, vendors are adding all sorts of nice features. to their field devices and control center equipment. And if you look through a trade magazine, you'll see vulnerabilities, at least what we see as vulnerabilities, 802.1x wireless support, Bluetooth, infrared ports, web services, terminal services, telnet. All of these protocols are not traditional control center protocols or communication mechanisms, but we're starting to see them added to field devices. And as a result, we've taken an attack landscape that was protocol specific or password specific, and now we've opened up the door to traditional IT types of attacks against our control center equipment. I'll just attack Bluetooth. I can download programs from the internet to do that. I don't have to think of anything new. To address these, I've called these security myths. I think there were some well-intentioned people who have implemented security in the terms of a technology or a device. Well, security is a process. You're not going to find security in a single device. It just doesn't work that way. And I'll just go through these quickly. A firewall implies absolute security. Well, a firewall tells me, I look at a firewall as an open door. It tells me how I can get behind it, what applications I can use, and it controls who supposedly can come through. It doesn't do anything with the intent of that message. Okay? Encryption implies the message is okay. Joe mentioned that message integrity is important for control systems, not confidentiality. And encryption doesn't really imply the message is okay. Encryption implies the message has not been changed from the time it was sent to the time it was received. That is the purpose of encryption. Again, it doesn't say anything about that content. I'll give you an example. I teach a class in web vulnerability assessment, and the first thing I do is point out that I don't have a certificate on the web server, because the certificate does not equal security for that web server. Same applies here. Encryption does not mean the data is okay or not malicious. Another security myth that we see that we need to overcome is that an intrusion detection system will catch everything. If you're using a signature-based intrusion detection system, it will catch what it's designed or programmed to catch, and it will miss other things. Same could be true for an anomaly detection intrusion system. It will only catch the anomalies that it has been designed to look for. Okay? You can't put all your eggs in one basket here. VPN use implies that the message is good. Well, we had an experience at the National Laboratory where we used SSH. I'm going to use SSH here instead of VPN because they're still encrypted tunnels. But so we were attacked by another national laboratory. They had a keyboard sniffer on their computer at their site. The ID that they were using was captured, and that remote connection, that secure connection, was used to compromise one of our systems. Okay? VPN use does not imply that the communication or the intent is good. Final security myth is that injecting bad data will simply cause an alarm. Joe Weiss gives an example of a utility in Texas that had a software bug. And the software bug caused their generator, their gas generator, to ramp up at 45 megawatts per minute, which is an awful lot of energy output. Actually increases the threshold of the generator itself. Ramped up to maximum capacity, ramped back down, ramped back up, ramped back down for 3 hours. Bad data coming in right and left. Not one alarm went off. Okay? We've done demonstrations where we've injected bad data into a SCADA system to see if operators can pick up on what's going on. And sometimes they do, but the HMI that Joe mentioned, the operator interface, that data may cause an alarm, may not. You can inject data to make it look like things are up when they're actually not. And you can also, another thing to keep in mind is that the contingency planning tools use the same data that the operator sees. So you impact all sorts of tools with single bad data. I'm not saying that you should not deploy these technologies. I'm saying that you should not deploy a single one of these technologies and assume you're okay, whether it's an IT system or a control system. some more examples of too much information. Paul, your examples were right on and very, very scary. This first one is kind of funny. We've done a good job, or a fairly good job, of removing information from our websites, but our recruiters go out and look for specific capabilities. And this recruiter is looking for someone who has experience with Allen Bradley PLCs and the RSView 32 software. That's the process that communicates with the PLCs. So this utility, we know as an adversary now what they're using. We can narrow our focus. But it's not just our recruiters that we need to be mindful of, it's our vendors. And this is a vendor from Washington State who put all these success stories out there. And this particular vendor sells wireless SCADA radios. Besides the 802.11 communication, there's communication at 900 at different frequencies. And this is used extensively. So we know that if I wanted to attack Grace Harbor PUD, I know which modem to use. And once I have that modem, I'm in. Even though they use spread spectrum technologies and this, that, and the other thing, once I have one of their modems, I'm in. I'm into the network. It's trivial. Now, Joe mentioned that the national labs are doing research in this area. And I don't want to leave you with the sense that everything's broken and the lights are going to go out because all I have to do is do a little research on the internet and put a command out there on a wire or through the air. The P&L approach, well, first of all, we support two programs. One is through DHS, through the National Cybersecurity Division Control System Security Program. And this concentrates on non-energy sectors, critical infrastructure sectors. We support the National SCADA Testbed at DOE, where we focus on energy, not oil, gas pipelines, natural gas pipelines, and electric infrastructure that's non-nuclear. And we believe that if we collaborate with programs such as that at the University of Idaho, the University of Washington, industry, other national labs, that we will develop better solutions and solutions that are palatable to industry. An example here is that there's been a neat device, it's really neat technology that uses AES encryption in a streaming fashion. AES is a block encryption device. But people have done research and they've developed this nice little device that does that in a streaming mode to reduce latency. No one wants to buy it because they want message integrity, not confidentiality. So that research effort didn't meet its objectives. That's what we want to avoid. We have developed technology that we are trying to migrate to industry to provide explicit trust in communication. Get rid of that implicit trust paradigm because it fails miserably. We've developed a control system authentication technology. We've done performance measurement. When you implement encryption or authentication at 1200 baud, you are going to have an impact. Even though it's running at 1200 baud, which is 120 characters per second, you may only have 20 characters per second that isn't being utilized by your control system. So your solution needs to fit into a real small window to be widely deployed. We participate with standards bodies in a number of ways. We're working, ISA has two groups, SP99 and SP100, both dealing with control systems. SP99 dealing with wired and SP100 dealing with wireless. For IEC, we do all sorts of interesting work where we examine key update technologies, for example, on different processor platforms to know what the real impact will be. If the IEC implements a standard that can't be deployed on control system equipment, it really doesn't do any good. They need to know what that will be. We've worked with NIST on control system standards for government, et cetera. So we are trying to get out there and make our presence felt. Real quickly, security awareness training. vendor product enhancement. There's some real cool technology out there that you can use to break things. And this vendor product enhancement comes through disruptive technology. You may use some of that here within your program, or at least allude to it. And the vendor is actually adding control system protocols to their product so that we can start to test these control system devices. In a nutshell, control systems today operate in an environment of implicit trust, and that is a huge, huge vulnerability, and one that we need to overcome. We can't look for that magic silver bullet because it doesn't exist. Again, security is a process, not a single technology. If we were to have trusted communication, now we have the ability to defend and respond to attacks that we don't today. And I think Paul would agree with this third bullet: reduce the amount of information available to an adversary. There's just flat out too much of it out there. And that we need to work together, whether it's to develop new technologies, port existing technologies from the IT world to control systems, increase security awareness. We need to work with academia, industry, other national labs. We need to partner together so that we do good research and we develop good mitigation strategies to these vulnerabilities that I mentioned and others. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I hope that from Mark's presentation you take away a couple of ideas. One is that these systems have been developed in an environment of trust. Trust is a singular glue in a free society, but having that trust may allow us to develop devices that have vulnerabilities once interconnected with societies that may not share that same view. It leaves us open and vulnerable in ways we hadn't thought about before. Secondly, I hope you take away the idea that technology is not the only answer for solving problems. Again, we have Pacific Northwest National Labs as a research entity here in the state of Washington addressing problems with control systems and SCADA systems, excellent technical research, but there's a bigger picture here that perhaps some of the answers to these problems come from other disciplines as well. The final answers won't be just technical answers. Education awareness, managing information, bringing that information down off the internet. Even having this dialogue with you folks tonight is an effort to get that word out and to raise awareness of the general public about some of these issues. The next speaker is a young man that we're very fortunate to have with us in the information school. He's been with us just a couple short years, but he's been able to make an incredible mark within our university. He's an assistant professor in the information school, but he's also an adjunct professor in the electrical engineering department, as well as being affiliate faculty member of the Center for American Politics and Public Policy. He's also the director of the Institute for National Security, Education and Research, one of the major sponsors of tonight's events, in addition to being a founding faculty member of the Institute for Innovation in Information Management. And he brings with him tonight the information management view of this problem. He's advised major companies as well as government entities on issues such as strategic management issues as well as competitive intelligence. He's also a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. And so I'd like you to welcome Kevin Desouza.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. My talk today is going to be at a higher perspective than the previous two talks because I am not exactly going to talk about the technical issues or issues that are particular to critical infrastructure, because in my view, the problem on protecting critical infrastructure starts actually with getting the right information to go after these problems. So there's the whole issue of who is going to attack these things, how are they going to attack them, why are they going to attack them, and more importantly, while we can place a lot of energy on protecting stuff, we also have to go out and attack the adversaries quicker than they can attack us. So it comes down to having the right amount of intel, okay, and getting the right intelligence, managing it, and actually going out and using it before it can be used on us is a critical precursor to protecting critical infrastructure. So that's going to be the perspective that I'll take as a standard disclaimer, because I'm going to throw examples out from various agencies, and I do run the OD&I program here. This is all my views. Blame everything on me. So, yeah. So if you look at the Intel process, and there are numerous examples starting from Pearl Harbor going all the way through, okay? And if you look at the recent attacks, Madrid, the Turkish attacks, the attacks in the Middle East and just everywhere, we haven't learned much, okay? If you look at the problems that were in place in Pearl Harbor or the Cuban Missile Crisis or the revolution, the same problems, the same recommendations came up when they did the review on 9/11. The same problems, the same recommendations came up when they said that we did not have any intel on the weapons of mass destruction. The problem is, and this is based on ongoing research, is people have viewed this problem in an isolated fashion. They view it as, okay, we didn't have better information, or we didn't share information, or we did not protect information, or blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, they lack the information management perspective on this problem. And the perspective that I'm about to share with you is truly an interdisciplinary perspective of this. The framework has been created from drawing on multiple disciplines, and it's taken about 4 years, roughly, give or take, to come up with this. But briefly, just as a review, normally people think about 4 things in any Intel cycle. You acquire information about your threats, you acquire information about things of need to you, okay? After you acquire them, you go and you analyze them. After you analyze them, you make an assessment. There's a very big difference between analyzing information and making an assessment. And the difference is very, very simple. In the analysis of information, you are never going to reach 100% guarantees. So any assessment that you make, you have to put your neck out. Okay, so that goes beyond just saying the data is giving me X or Y. You have to say, I believe this is going to happen. And after you make an assessment, you have to go out and act. Okay, so these are the 4 major elements of an Intel process. And recently, if you take a look at any of the failures, we have had problems in all 4 things, from acquisition, limited human sources. Here is a small quiz question. In the case of getting information on weapons of mass destruction capability on Iraq, how many sources did we have on this information? Anybody wants to take a guess? How many sources did we have on the ground? 100, yeah, 100, 200, 20? 4, 0. 0. How many did the Brits have? 3, out of which all 3 were unreliable afterwards. Doesn't help. Analysis has had a bunch of problems and assessments and actions. Now, the interesting thing to note about this, if you look at how the Intel community is structured, and this includes elements of critical infrastructure protection, acquisition, analysis, and actions are done by different units, different departments, different regions of the country even, depending on the kinds of intel you're talking about. So there's an issue of control and there's an issue of coordination, so on and so forth. So what we did, and this is the framework we use to frame research projects, is we stated as the following. Information management and deals with the whole process from going from your information sources to the analysis of it, to how you interpret the stuff, and then how you act on this. And you have to do these 4 things very, very carefully, and more importantly, in today's world, you have to be able to manage information better than your adversary. It's not good enough to be just excellent. You have to be more excellent than the person who wants to take you down. And so given this, what we did was we broke this up into different components. The first one being the ability to get information from the sources that you care about. Now, in the case of critical infrastructure protection, that means getting information on your threats, getting information on the people who want to do you harm. These are both internal and external. Getting to understand the behavior of these people, getting to understand how these sources are organized, because in most attacks, it's not just a discrete person, there is normally a collection of these people. And so if you break down the source management problem, it comes down to these capabilities. Can you identify your sources, both the people who are going to attack you and the good people that are going to protect you? For example, in one of the briefings that I attended, the person talking was giving a presentation about the new open source intelligence program that's started up at the CIA. Okay? Open source intelligence, that started only after 9/11. Think about that for a second. Most of the very good intel on Iraq was found on open sources, not on clandestine sources. So where are you gathering this information from? Do you have the right collection of sources? Then do you know how to evaluate the characteristics? Are your sources permanent or are they transient? A permanent attacker has different kinds of problems that you have to deal with than sources that are transient, or sources that are static versus sources that are dynamic, sources that are internal to you or sources that are external to you. Then the other thing, how are these sources organized? Okay, today we did a project where we studied how various terrorist groups are organized. They have fairly mature organization structures. They enter into mergers and acquisitions. They have production and development agreements, things that are common to us in the business world are also common to these groups. And how are they organized will help you understand how to break them up, because it's easier to break up the structure than it is to go after each individual entity just because of the numbers game. Then how are you going to gather information from these things? The next two are, how are you going to update the collection of these sources? Because guess what? A source today may not be the source tomorrow, and so on and so forth. And the item that has already been talked about is, how do you protect your own stuff? Okay, because an important element of this is, how do you protect your own information? And you have already heard about the amounts of information that are available. Once you get all this stuff, you got to spend a lot of time analyzing this. Now, this is where things get really, really interesting. Let me give you the example. So in the case of the weapons of mass destruction, there was a source named Curve, I think it's called Curveball, right? Thank you. That was providing information about the biological weapons in Iraq. There was only some small problems with this. One, it was wrong, but two, the group handling them were the DHS, the Defense Human Services, I think it's called, or Human Intelligence Services, one of those two, that was interacting with Curveball. Now, and as they were gathering this information was being fed up to the analysts who were most probably based out of the CIA offices, Langley. And the CIA the analyst was saying, well, this doesn't really make a lot of sense. We need to go talk to Curveball. You can't talk to Curveball. Okay, we just get the information and analyze it. Okay. The problem with this is source management and analytics management, especially for Intel-related problems, are two compartmentalized things. People on the field are not the ones doing the analysis. People doing the analysis will never get to the field. That's why they do analysis, because they were not able to go to the field, or people in the field, they were not prepared to handle office jobs. And so getting the right information to the right people who can actually act on this is a problem. So under analytics, these are the major things you need to do better than your adversary. The first one is you need to discover relationships among threats. Discovering relationships is becoming more and more important just because of the amount of attacks. Okay? If you look at the sheer amount of people that are willing to take things down, that number is growing. Now, the chances of each one of them being successful is very, very low. But there will be patterns that emerge from these attacks that you need to discover. Then you need to train your own users, kind of like the classes going on in Idaho on how to actually attack stuff. Because you have to be able to attack and take things down, because guess what? If you attack other people, they have to deal with that headache first before they can come back at you. Once you discover relationships, you also have to validate them. There have been numerous cases where this has not worked in the Intel community. You also need to develop a framework on how you're going to continuously analyze this stuff, because it's very, very expensive to keep reinventing the process. Okay? To reinvent the process on how you're going to take information and actually analyze it is very expensive. The next point on visualizing relationships, in the earlier presentation you saw a nice screenshot. How are you going to build more complex tools that is able to take large amounts of text data, video data, image data, and actually make it in ways that people can actually use them? Then you got to actually manage tools and evaluate tools. The last point is quite important. It's called the reuse problem. Today, most tools that get invented are very seldom used to their full productivity. What that means is people may spend X amount of dollars, build a tool, use it for 3 days, and then throw it out. The problem with that is eventually every organization, and there's probably not been any organization that I have gone to where this has not been the case, has a collection of tools. They have a whole toolbox, many of which they don't know who's using, why are they using it, and what are the loopholes in it. That opens up the security issues and also the risk issues. Next one is interpretation. Once you get the information, you actually have to interpret the stuff. This is where things, again, get a whole lot more interesting. The basic elements here is the following. Understanding threats, and this is where I get kind of upset with a lot of security people, is the minute you talk about threats, the word risk comes up. And the minute you talk about risk, the word protection comes up. And the minute you talk about protection, risk, then you talk about, oh, we need a policy. All of that, the word opportunity is missing. And opportunity is the flip side of risk. If you view risk in something, there's also opportunity in something. And a lot of the thinking needs to change to how do we take these things about threats and turn them into opportunities so that we're not really always doing preventive measures. And this is where a lot of new thinking needs to come in on how do we analyze information and actually come up with opportunities. So how do we generate these opportunities? How do we test them, and so on and so forth. And we can talk about more of these at the Q&A if needed. But the whole point being is we can't really go and say let's have threats and risk and policies and then let's have policy after policies because those really don't help, at least from my view. Last one is actions. Come up with this stuff and then we actually have to do it. A very nice example here. I about 3 months back had a chance to go into a large government agency in DC, and I asked the question, how many policies do you have on how do you classify a piece of information? Take a guess on the answer. How many policies do you have? 1 million? Pretty close. We don't know. There are a lot, was the answer. That's a problem. That's a major, major problem. Actions, people get paralyzed by the analysis. And it's a dangerous problem. So how can you construct actions, coordinate these, execute them? And you have to remember, you have to do these at a pace that's quicker and faster than your adversary. If you know a threat's materializing, you got to be able to put in place a team and deploy them and get at this stuff. And in most cases, you have to coordinate this stuff. In critical infrastructure protection, most of the failures happen in the coordination of action. There's actually blue-on-blue attacks with different agencies who don't really talk to each other. The communication of actions. Last two are equally, or last three, how do you evaluate actions? Every time things get screwed up, we have a commission meeting, a hearing this and a hearing that. And if you look at, if you ever get free time and need things to read, take a look at the last 8 Intel failures. Read up on a few of those reports. I guarantee you a few of that text is copy-pasted. Okay? There's no learning that happens. There's no evaluation of this stuff and reusing. So in total, you can look at that and then map the information components of the Intel community or a critical infrastructure protection group. And we devised these using a few other models. But to move from ad hoc to optimize, you have to move away from it being a personal problem. And that is a big challenge today because guess what? The security that we have built into each of the agencies, each of the information objects, each of the people who run this, each of the clearance processes makes this a personal problem. Information cannot move freely. So in my view, a lot of the security that we have put in place makes this an individual problem because guess what? Kevin, you only have the need to know. That's it. You cannot go talk to Barbara, or you can't go talk to Joe or anybody else. You have to. So it's my problem, and we can't really share this stuff. The next stage is the reactive stage, and so on and so forth. And if you map out the IC today, it'll kind of look like this. sources management, if you take out the technical pieces, it's really, really ad hoc. Analytics is very nice. The minute anything happens, we react to it, kind of like a customer service department of a company. You know, the minute customers complain, then we have a next problem to address. The interpretation management, here is where things are changing, so I hope. And actions are just, you know, pretty much for most cases, we could pretty much roll a coin or roll a dice and we'd probably be better off. So that's my view, and thank you.
Applying the information management view, the Intel perspective that Kevin is talking about, to critical infrastructures, we're talking about an ad hoc situation in terms of collecting information. You've heard that discussed by a couple of our speakers, that there is no way that that information is being collected or even begun to be shared. We're talking about an action that is most likely ad hoc as well. So we're at the very beginning stages of applying other domain intelligence to solving this particular problem. Certainly, technical solutions are, for the most part, defensive. Kevin's talking about something that's a little more proactive, but we're at the beginning stages of thinking through this problem as it relates to this particular sector.
Unintended Consequences of the Information Age, a colloquium series that explores controversial issues emerging from our point-and-click world. Our infrastructures, online and vulnerable, presented by the Center for Information Assurance and Cybersecurity and sponsored by the UW Institute for National Security Education and Research and the UW Master of Strategic Planning for Critical Infrastructures online graduate program, with additional support from the Information School, the Pacific Northwest Center for Global Security, and Pacific Northwest National Laboratory